people of YouTube, what's the most messed up thing you've ever seen? Story 1. I remember playing on the playground at elementary school, and we had some gates with spiked edges that were designed to keep kids from climbing up them. Unfortunately, one talented kid decided to make his way up the gate, and once he reached the top, he started to climb down, lost his footing, and nearly ended up impaling his head on said gate. It got stuck up in the skin on the back of his skull. He was still conscious and holding himself up to prevent the spike from going any deeper, and he was actively crying and yelling at others to get a teacher. It was a very scary moment for him and everyone watching. A bunch of staff and students helped keep him in place by holding his feet up to evenly distribute his weight, and in the end, he was okay after getting down safely, and came back to school about a few days later with stitches in the back of his upper neck area and the lower back of his head. Some of the doctors told him that he needed time to mentally recover, but he was back at school because he said he wanted to be with his friends. He's all grown up now, and he still has the scar, but it looks like a tiny scratch in his head. Crazy stuff, though, but shortly after witnessing that, I had my first introduction into what therapy was. Story 2. When I was 12, my dad went for a joyride on his motorcycle. It was the one time he forgot to put on all his gear, and on this little joyride, a car pulled in front of him. Of course, he jumped off the motorcycle, but that caused the front end to pop up and the tire to slam into the driver's side window, bust through, hit the driver right in the head, bounce off. My dad had road rash so bad you could see through to bone in some places, and thankfully, somehow, the driver only got a concussion, and after 1.5 years, my dad's back is fully healed. It's scary to think that my dad almost died and simultaneously killed someone. Story 3. I had a widowmaker's heart attack on September 19th last year. It was in the middle of a work shift, and I didn't go to the ER for almost an hour. A coworker was actually the one that talked me into going to the hospital, and the one that drove me. The doctor had me call my wife to tell her goodbye because he didn't think I was going to survive getting the blockages removed. My blood pressure was 212 over 135, with my pulse at 185 beats per minute. They thought they were going to see a hole in my heart from the blood pressure being so high when they did the angiogram. With these kind of heart attacks, you have a 12% chance of survival if you have it outside the hospital, and 25% chance of survival if it's in the hospital. With how long I waited and how high my blood pressure was, the odds were not in my favor. So I know how lucky I am. Story 4. My parents always threatened to unalive me. They were physically abusive, so that wasn't out of the question either. My younger, but older sibling actually tried to do me in one time, and when I escaped to a homeless shelter, I was threatened multiple times again. Even the owners somewhat contributed to this by kicking out everybody for just small issues. The reason they were going to kick me out was because I didn't change the trash at the right time. It's not that I didn't change the trash, I just didn't do it at the time they wanted me to, because I had work. But leaving the homeless shelter was not just me losing a home, but losing my source of food. So, in a sense, this would have been a death sentence. I'm sure everybody else who did get kicked out had this happen to them. One girl, after getting the news that she was going to be kicked out for staying out too late at night, unalived herself. Story 5. I saw a car flip on its roof on the highway. Me, my mum, and my brother were going to McDonald's in this place called Star City in England, which is basically a massive mall, mainly known for its cinema, but also has a bunch of stores and places to eat and whatnot. Now, the road we normally go down is blocked off because of a massive crash, and there's 2 cars involved, one car sitting on its roof in the middle of the road. It was a wild sight, and I'm not sure if either of the occupants of either vehicle survived. It was bad, and I very much enjoyed my McDonald's after that. Damn, dude. I actually saw a similar thing one time. Someone driving a Kia Soul hit a median right on an off-ramp and flipped over. The car right onto its roof. Blocked the entire off-ramp, and being a car that's pretty square, like more square than a Volvo, these things are damn near impossible to flip. Couple that with the fact that it flipped in such a bad spot on the highway, and it was not a fun day for emergency crews. Story 6. My first year in college, my dad had a heart attack caused by a complete blockage in his biggest artery. Fortunately, he managed to survive because he drove himself to the ER, and because of that, he's still alive to this day. Scary thing is, a few months later, this guy my mom knew had the same heart attack while working at a hospital, and he died. He had 2 kids that weren't even in high school yet. Yeah, I guess it just came down to luck that my dad managed to pull through and survive. It rattles me to this day to think of how close to not making it he really was. Story 7. My father was a fireman, and he always tells me stories about his job. Once he told me that he was called to stop a fight between two drunk guys. One of them was armed with a scythe. Yes, a fucking scythe. Basically, this man attacked the other, and the scythe got stuck in the other guy's head. My father got there, and the man was so drunk he didn't even panic. In fact, I'm not sure he even noticed. He deadass had a conversation with my father while they took him to the hospital. Even the doctors didn't believe it. My dad still recalls many occurrences like this. This wasn't even the weirdest. Story 8. My best friend and his little brother were in their treehouse as teenagers while it was still being built. The little brother goes to climb down the ladder made of 2x4s nailed into the tree trunk, and he slips and falls probably 20 feet, hitting the ladder's last few rungs and scalping himself on the way down. Apparently, there was blood everywhere, and he had pretty bad migraines for a week or so after it happened, but he managed to make a full recovery. And let me tell you, it's a damn good thing he landed where he did, because about a foot from where he dropped, there was a bunch more reclaimed wood full of old rusty nails that was going to be used for the treehouse. Story 9. My dad shouldn't be alive. One day, he started acting extremely drunk, despite never having had a drink in his life, and he was listing heavily to one side. But he was refusing to see the doctor because he thought he was fine. The next morning, after trying and failing to put his socks on without falling over, he finally agreed to go see a doctor, who sent him immediately to the emergency room, who then sent him to another hospital to be operated on. He had a chronic epidural hematoma and an acute subdural hematoma that caused a midline shift of 9 millimeters. It's normal to go into a coma if you have more than a 5 millimeter shift. Subdural hematomas also kill people very quickly, within a few hours of the first symptom. When the doctor came into his hospital room, he was clearly expecting to tell us how our dad probably wasn't going to survive the procedure. Then did a double take when he saw that he was sitting up and chatting with all of us. As she's explaining things, she keeps looking at the scan, then back to him over and over like they just don't match up. After the operation, our dad proudly tells us how he was the healthiest person in the ICU, and it was no big deal. He still underplays what happened to this day, and we have to keep reminding him that he doesn't get to make decisions about how healthy he is anymore. This isn't the only time either. He also tried to sleep off appendicitis and ignored cancer up until it was stage 3, and then got mad at us when we forced him to get operated on again when his brain bleed came back. We don't believe him when he says he's fine. Yeah, I'll say. Some people can be extra stubborn, but this man should have died on multiple occasions, so I mean, maybe he's onto something with that stubbornness. In all seriousness though, if you perceive a problem, see a doctor. It's not worth your life to take that risk. Story 10. My friend and this other guy had some minor beef for a couple days. This guy threatened my friend, so me and a couple buddies decided to walk with them to and from school just in case. We get to the second last bus stop, and my friend basically gets jumped, getting slapped and kicked and tossed to the floor. During this, some guy yells, "Oi, leave him alone!" So the guys beating up my friend walk away, and everyone that was there except me walks away with him. As they're walking away, one of his friends turns around and says that they thought he was just going to scare my buddy. I felt guilty and pretty friggin' annoyed for the rest of the week. Guilty because I felt I could have maybe done something, and annoyed because my best friend got jumped. But in hindsight, things probably would have been worse if I'd gotten involved. Story 11. I was lying in bed peacefully, half awake, probably around 12 p.m., and I get woken up by a call from my stepdad. I walk over and open my door to my bedroom, and I just see him lying there on the floor face down. He asks me to call an ambulance on his phone, because I didn't have one at the time, and they put me through to the EMTs, who ask me a couple questions that I answer as best I can, because I'm pretty shaken, and then they tell me to roll my stepdad onto his back. I try, but this man is heavy. I'm struggling for a good 2 to 3 minutes trying to flip him over, and I just can't. I tell the EMT on the phone, I can't do it, he's just too heavy, and they tell me to stay on the line while they send someone over. Within a couple minutes, they come, get him into the ambulance, and wheel him off to the hospital. He was fine, and he never did tell me what it was that caused it, but it was scary as hell. Story 12. Not me, but a buddy of mine. They were walking down the street, and suddenly a car flies off the curb and onto the sidewalk. The car stops, and while my friend is standing there, understandably shaken, these people get out and shout at him, "Oi, why are you just standing there?" My friend says, "What do you mean? I've just seen a car fly out from Narnia." Yeah, what on earth were these people doing? I mean, how do you just jump your car up onto the curb and then just casually get out and yell at a kid? If you're fine, call 911 yourself. Don't yell at the guy who you almost nailed on the sidewalk. And if the car's okay and no one got hurt, just drive away and pay better attention next time. Some fucking people. Story 13. I got my foot nearly sliced off when I was 10, and my first reaction was to hide it. So I was hopping around the house, trailing blood everywhere, and managed to make it to the bathroom, where I proceeded to shove towels against the wound as my foot was just kinda hanging out, half sliced off. It hadn't broken any bones, but a lot of big tendons and stuff were cut. I was pretty dizzy and had accidentally locked myself in the bathroom, but when my brother realized something was wrong, he called my mother and grandfather, who were able to break the door down and carry me screaming and crying to the car, where my mom hopped in, started it, and sped to the ER. She was looking back at me every 2 seconds and constantly getting me to respond to her to keep me awake, because at this point I had soaked 3 to 4 rags in blood. We got there, and somehow I walk in on my own with a very painful limp, and am crying when the doctor set me up in a room. The doc gave me stitches right then and there, and I was screaming the whole time because the anesthesia shot he gave me didn't numb at all. It just didn't work, and I was trying to tell him this, but my mom just told me to bite her hand or bite my hand because I was more scared than in pain. No, Mom, the damn shot didn't work, and I could feel this man piercing and pulling my shredded flesh. Yeah, some doctors just don't listen when you tell them that, hey, the first shot didn't work. I've been lucky with my doctors in that they actually listened to me. I typically need 2 anesthesia shots, but I had a friend whose dentist didn't even want to give her one at all. She had to get a cavity done, and the doctor was like, well, now that you're 18, we're going to try without the anesthesia this time. If you don't know what's wrong with that statement, then I can't help you. Unless maybe you've got some sort of explanation as to why being 18 means that you don't get anesthesia. I've never experienced that. I don't know anyone else who's experienced that. So as far as I'm concerned, that dentist is just a dumbass. Story 14. I was with my mom at the bus station holding her hand. I was probably around 5 years old, and the bus right next to the one we were getting on started moving to leave the station when a young boy, not much older than me, throws himself under the wheels of the bus. I saw it all. Apparently he was going through some shit and decided to unalive himself. My mom always told me that he didn't suffer once I was able to grasp and really understand what had happened, because that was my first experience with death. Yeah, those final moments may not have involved suffering, but to get to that point to begin with requires an extreme amount of suffering. I've known a fair number of people who have tried, thankfully none who have succeeded, but no, the stuff these people go through to get to that point, and to think of a kid so young, like 5 years old, yeah, sure, he wasn't quite comprehending what he was doing, but the pain at 5 years old, I frankly, I can't imagine. Story 15. My brother works as miscellaneous at a hospital. He basically cleans the floors. He was in the emergency section, and we live in Costa Rica, so dumb people hitting themselves with machetes or getting hit by other people by doing dumb shit is not super common, but it's never really a surprise when it happens. So one day, my brother sees this guy come in from the ambulance that likely tried to rob a house and thought it was a good idea to jump a razor wire fence for a quick escape route. This guy's head is barely attached to his shoulders. His throat is slit wide open and blood is spurting up to the ceiling like a fountain because he nicked an artery pretty bad. The only thing keeping his head attached to the rest of his body was his vertebrae, I guess. But apparently that was enough for the doctors to reconnect all the veins, tendons, and whatever else to reattach his head fully to the rest of his neck. The guy survived somehow after all that and just needed a couple months of therapy to speak fluently again. But as far as I know, he's somewhere out there now, hopefully making better life choices that won't land him damn near headless in the hospital. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. It really helps me out a ton. I know my videos have been kind of few and far between recently. I'm currently in the process of moving houses and looking for places and figuring everything out. It's just been hectic as hell. But we'll get there. I'm going to keep trying to post every 2 days, hopefully not every 3 days like this video was. But with that said, I'm ReddList. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you next time.